Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Auntie Joan and the choir for that fantastic introduction. Could I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and note that Aboriginal people are some of the worst dealt with in terms of housing. It's a terrible situation for many, many Aboriginal people. I acknowledge and thank those who are appearing before the Commission over the 2 days to provide details of their experience, their struggles in trying to be safe, secure, and find affordable housing. I want to thank my co-commissioner, Professor Nicole Gurran, who brings great intellect and insight into the challenges of housing. Nicole's TED Talk of some 5 years ago is still extremely relevant and should be compulsory viewing for all members of Parliament. I want to thank Everybody's Home for this initiative, which gives a voice to those who are bearing the brunt of a failed housing market. The Commission would not be possible without the hard work of Margaret, Alicia, and Sophie, and they deserve our thanks. Everybody's Home is a national campaign to fix the housing crisis. The campaign has more than 43,000 individual supporters and more than 500 organisational supporters. As has been indicated, we have received over 1,500 surveys and individual submissions. The so-called housing market is failing the nation. It is the perfect example of market failure, resulting in overpriced, unaffordable homes, particularly for those on low and middle incomes. The housing system in Australia is a major contributor to the unequal distribution of wealth. The system is dividing Australia into those who have access to home ownership and those who never will. As we will hear over the next 2 days, affordable, secure, and fit-for-purpose rentals are almost non-existent for low-income Australians and those who rely on social security payments to survive. The imposition of and dominance of neoliberal policies such as individualism, small government, privatisation, competition policy has resulted in the demise of public housing as a common good. Governments have, to various degrees, capitulated to the Hayek-Friedman doctrines of a limited role for the state. This, coupled with preferential tax treatment for property owners, has resulted in poverty, anxiety, and social dislocation. Far too many live in rental or mortgage stress. If households invest their savings in driving up the price of existing bricks and mortar, rather than investing in human capital or forming new firms, then long-term growth and productivity within Australia is likely to stay low. The decision to have the housing portfolio in Treasury, in my view, is a bad decision. Treating housing as just another commodity and subjecting it to neoliberal dogma limits options for innovative solutions. This flawed approach treats housing as an economic issue and a vehicle for wealth accumulation instead of a fundamental driver of social cohesion and an enabler to build a good society. I have always thought that housing should be separated from Treasury and be part of the infrastructure portfolio. There is no more important infrastructure than housing. I would argue that the demise of public housing in Australia is a major contributor to the housing crisis that we find ourselves in today. One of the great social and political disasters of the last few decades has been reducing public housing to residual housing, where our most socially and financially disadvantaged citizens are congregated. I recently read an Ahuri report that notes many Australians associate public housing, and get this, with crime and criminality, disorder, antisocial behaviour, welfare dependency, and impressions of a detached underclass, unwilling or unable to engage with labour market opportunities or mainstream norms and values. What a terrible analysis. This is a distressing generalisation that allows governments to abandon increased investment in public housing. Ahuri does not necessarily accept this generalisation. However, this is a result of governments progressively abandoning their obligations to provide affordable public housing and simply adopting market-based approaches that fail low and middle income Australians. This in turn creates a self-fulfilling situation where public housing is seen by many as a form of housing that should be avoided. In contrast, many Australians are desperate to have the opportunity to live in affordable and secure public housing. In my view, it is the responsibility of governments to learn the lessons of post-war Australia, where public housing was used to reduce poverty, address deteriorating housing conditions, and as a necessity to advance the economy, with the bulk of public housing families having at least one employed household member. Restoring public housing as a legitimate and important component of the Australian housing sector must be a priority for all governments. As many governments around the world reassess their capitulation to neoliberal dogma, there is a need in Australia to return to a more enlightened approach to how we house the population. The community housing sector has been a proxy for public housing. The sector has been used by governments to justify abandoning its responsibility to provide what is a basic human right. Governments have contracted out this obligation to a sector that relies on insufficient public funding and does not have the financial capacity of governments to access cheaper, more affordable finance to build capacity. I have great admiration for the professional, dedicated people in the community housing sector. Nevertheless, they face significant challenges that should be addressed by governments investing in both community and public housing. One of my great disappointments as Parliamentary Secretary and then Shadow Minister for Housing was the reluctance of many in the industry superannuation sector to grasp the importance of safe and secure housing for its members. I could never understand why investing in residential housing in the interests of the membership was not seen as a priority by fund managers. Hiding behind the sole purpose test, demanding scales and unachievable returns is not consistent with the needs and interests of members of superannuation funds. Investing in housing that provides long-term, predictable and consistent returns, though moderate returns, as part of a balanced investment portfolio should be the goal of every industry superannuation fund. According to APRA, in September 2022, industry funds account for, listen to this, $1,081 billion in accumulated funds and assets, an unimaginable amount of capital. These assets belong to the workers of Australia, the very workers who are experiencing excruciating financial pressure as a result of the failed housing system and global inflation. These funds would not exist without the leadership from the Labour Party and the Australian union movement. I believe it's a fundamental responsibility of industry super funds to work with government, unions, and its members to investigate how it can best contribute to the supply of affordable, well-designed, and environmentally sustainable build-to-rent, low-cost housing for the working class of Australia. Solving the housing crisis requires input from government, business, unions, superannuation funds, and the community housing industry. Industry superannuation leaders must accept that it is in the interest of their members and the nation to navigate through what they claim are impediments to investment in housing, particularly affordable rental accommodation. If the legislation around the sole purpose test restricts sensible and profitable investment in housing, then the government should legislate to remove outdated and counterproductive definitions and restrictions. As one of the most important and powerful and cashed up entities in the country, the superannuation industry must stop making excuses and act in the interests of their membership and the nation by contributing to building affordable housing for working class Australians. Some funds are investing in affordable rental housing for key workers, and this investment is performing well. However, it is not at a sufficient scale to make a difference. Unaffordable housing is not just an Australian problem, it exists worldwide and is a particular issue in advanced Western economies. Issues such as low productivity in the housing sector, skill shortages, using the same work organisation and management systems that have predominated for decades is not conducive to resolving housing shortages for low and middle income workers. Following Brexit, the UK Conservative government faced massive skill shortages. As EU workers returned home, they commissioned the Construction Leadership Council to identify actions to reduce the industry's structural vulnerability to a lack of skilled workers. A review of the council was carried out by Mark Farmer, CEO of Cass Consultancy, and resulted in the Farmer Review of the UK construction labour model. It had a subtitle of Modernise or Die, Time to Decide the Industry's Future. Many of the findings have fundamental relevance in Australia. For instance, much of the industry does not make enough money. When the industry does make money, it has not have enough confidence it will be profitable into the future. The challenge is to do things differently, to reduce the reliance on building in the same way we have for decades, if not centuries. The industry will not have the labour force to deliver what the country needs by working in the same way. Low margins, adversarial pricing models, and financial fragility is a feature of the industry. A dysfunctional training, funding, and delivery model. Lack of research and development and investment and innovation. Non-aligned interests reinforced by traditional procurement protocols and a deep-seated cultural resistance to change. The government should act to provide a stimulus to innovation by promoting the use of pre-manufactured solutions through policy measures, including direct commissioning of prefabricated manufactured housing. Significant work has been done in Australia by the prefabrication industry. A report called Building the Future We Want outlines the benefits of modular building, including productivity improvement, environmental sustainability, and lower costs for heating and cooling. I'd like to thank Lance Worrell, a respected political economist and economic and industry development specialist, for bringing this report to my attention. We have received this report as a submission to the Commission. I believe that a strong, highly productive, environmentally sustainable modular housing industry should be a priority for government. Surely, this would be a housing initiative that is consistent with the $1.7 billion Investing in a Future Made in Australia initiative. I note the submission from the Honourable Julie Collins, Minister for Housing, outlining the $25 billion investment by government in housing. Decades of underinvestment in housing cannot be resolved in the first term of an Albanese government. Progress has been made. However, continuous policy improvement and increased investment in public and community housing should be a priority. Protecting vulnerable Australians from poverty, homelessness, mortgage and rental stress should be a bread and butter issue for all Australian governments. Much more needs to be done. We have received many submissions calling for the abolition of change to negative gearing and capital gains tax relief. Unfortunately, a massive political scare campaign by vested interests derailed what should have been a sensible and equitable tax reform. Hopefully, we can be mature enough in the future to have a sensible debate about housing-related tax reform. Intelligent, progressive, and necessary change should not be used as a political battering ram. Linking housing shortages and unaffordability to lower immigration, as if this was the magic bullet that would unlock and supply and affordability, is yet another example of the immaturity of the housing debate within Australia. We need better than scare campaigns with racial undertones if we are to resolve the massive social costs related to affordable housing. The submissions that you will hear today amplify the need to resolve the economic and social damage that unaffordable housing costs. I expect that sensible housing reform and recommendations from the Commission can be added to the broader social reforms recommended in the State of the Housing System 2024 report by the Housing Supply and Affordability Council. Building a good society, a fair society, a society where no one is left behind requires a focus on the issues raised by those you will hear from today. No one should be required to go hungry to pay the rent or the mortgage. No one should be left without affordable housing that provides security, warmth, and comfort. Affordable housing is essential for safe, healthy, and a secure future. No one should be denied these basic rights. Even more government investing in social housing is essential, because without that investment, people will still go hungry, older women will still be sleeping in cars, young people will be couch surfing, and that is not what a good Australian society should be. We are a rich country. We should spend those riches making sure that everyone has a fair go. Thank you.